Hello everyone, Nadezhda here, and in today's lesson we are going to learn how to create one site plan in Revit. As you can see on my screen, I have the site plan of one project that I have worked on in the past, and I'm going to walk you step by step how to create one site plan just like this. Let's begin. First thing you have to do is obviously you have to create a floor plan. So I go to the View tab, I go to the Plan Views and I click Floor Plan tool. First you have to uncheck this Do Not Duplicate Existing View option so you can see all of your levels. And here I will choose my ground floor and click OK. As with any other plan, the first thing you have to do is you have to set up your view range. To set up the view range, we go to the View Range tool, obviously, and here I will choose the 1.2 meters of the view range because I want to see my ground floor plan cut up. But for the bottom, I am going to choose level below because I want to see everything of the lower ground floor as sort of the main part of the entire site plan. And for the view depth, I'm actually going to choose unlimited. I choose unlimited because my terrain is very steep. It goes many meters below the actual ground floor, but obviously these settings are not going to be the same for each project, for each kind of the terrain. Obviously, if you have some kind of the flat terrain, you are not going to need to choose unlimited here. You would simply choose the level below and that would probably be enough for you. But in case of these very steep terrains, I'm going to choose the unlimited option and I'm going to click OK. And as you can see now, everything is visible. And the next thing is setting up our graphical settings. I will link in the description below the lesson about the advanced graphical settings, and by advanced I mean actually setting everything up like line styles, line weights and everything else. But for now let's just go to the visibility graphics option and let's just turn off the main things that are bothering us in this plan. The first thing is obviously the furniture because we don't need it. We don't need reference planes either. I go to the annotation categories and I will find the reference lines and reference planes. Of course, these are not visible when plotting, but I still don't like them confusing me. So I click OK. I also don't need the elevations, so I go to visibility graphics and I find the elevations and I turn them off as well. Of course, whenever you're setting up the template or visibility graphics, you are going to be kind of going back and forth. You are going to need to sometimes turn off some elements and then turn them back on. So we are probably going to be doing that a couple of times. Like I said, if you are interested in the lesson about these graphical settings in depth, I'm going to link that in the description below. So let's continue. Now that we have turned off all the elements that we don't need, next setting is actually changing the orientation of our project. And for this part, you need to georeference your project. You need to set up these coordinates. That lesson will also be available in the description below, and that is how to set up the coordinates of your project. I consider this part of the lesson to be necessary because unless you do that, you are going to lack a lot of these tools. A lot of these steps are not going to be possible for you because unless you geoposition your model, you are not going to be able to use spot coordinates tool. You're also not going to be able to use true north to change the orientation of your plan, and you are also not going to be able to choose the correct survey spot elevations. So it is a necessary part if you want to be doing the site plans in Revit. I will also post the link of that lesson in the description below, so check that out as well if you haven't already georeferenced your model. So once I'm sure that the coordinates of my project are correct, I can now change the orientation to be true north. And as you can see now, everything kind of changes to be in the right orientation. And I have already previously modeled the plot line of my project. As you can see, once I isolate it, we can see this red line, and that is the correct plot line that I have created by picking the lines from my CAD survey file. I have also created the lesson on this topic as well, so I will post it below in case you need it. You can just find it in the description below. So let's continue. And now the next step is setting the scale. Usually the scale will be somewhere around 200 to 500, and in case of really large projects, maybe even more. But in this case, this is actually a very small project, so I was using 100. But in the majority of these small projects, it is going to be around 200, for example. So I'm going to be using 200 in this tutorial because it is a more correct option. I'm just going to get these grid lines a little bit outside of the project so they are not in the way. In the case of these overlapping grid lines, we can use this add elbow option and click on this symbol and just change the elbow of our grid line. I can even get this part out a little bit and just make sure that I don't have any overlapping grid heads. I will do the same for this one as well. So we first check this 3D symbol to turn this into the 2D grid line. And then we click add elbow option. In this case, we can also just stretch this one if that is something that works better for us. You basically have two of these options. Since I have already done this on this one, I will do the same thing here. I click on the add elbow option, and this one actually from the very beginning creates itself to be perfect actually. I have moved the grid head too to be a little bit outside because there is already too many grid heads here, but you can essentially treat it the same way that these other ones are treated. And also what I notice here is that these grid heads are a little bit large, so I'm just going to select one and go to the edit type option, and I can see how this symbol is called. So what I have to do now is find this family in the family options, and I scroll all the way down to the families folder and I find the annotation symbols option. Here I find the M grid head. Let's just find it. I find the M grid head family and I click on this plus sign. I can see that I have this circle type and I double click on it and I can now see the radius of it. In order to get it a little bit smaller, I'm just going to change this number to be, for example, 45. Let's try that and click OK. And this is a little bit too small, to be honest, so I'm just going to go with 55 and click OK. And now we have a little bit smaller grid heads. Of course, this setting changes the grid heads in all of the other scales, so you have to kind of open up some plans or some sections just to make sure that none of the other views got affected by this negatively. So let's just open up some random plan and we can see that they are a lot smaller here. So just make sure that you actually like how they look in the other views as well. And now that that part is done, let's just rename our view to not be called ground floor 1, but let's just call it site plan for now. And the next part is actually adding these lines. As for this line, it is actually the plot line that we have modeled. So that part is obviously a 3D plot line, but the rest of these are actually drawn with detail lines. Essentially, this setback was provided to us by the urbanistic parameters. Basically, by law, you have to follow some setbacks. You have to offset your building from the property line by some distance, and in this case we were giving the exact distances where we have to create setback from the plot boundary and also from the neighborhood plots. So these are two different kind of setbacks. As you can see, the building setback relative to adjacent property, that means basically offsetting from the neighborhood plot, and this one is per regulation, and that is basically a default setback from the plot lines. This is something that depends on the regulations, so this part you obviously check with the regulation from the area you are creating your building in. So let's say, for example, your setback is by regulation supposed to be 2.5 meters from the plot line. Let's use that rule. Let's not complicate this too much because things are obviously going to be very different for each one of you. So let's just make up a rule, and let's say, for example, you need a setback that is 2.5 meters from your plot line. As you can see, plot is created by the plot lines, but for these other lines you have few options. Some people use the plot line to create this, but it is not a good option because it creates the conflict in the schedules. Once you are creating schedules, basically you do want to have one plot line, you have to have one area that is going to be present in all of your schedules, in all of your legends. So my recommendation is only actually creating the plot line by using the plot line tool. Everything else can be modeled by model lines or detailed lines. Basically, the difference is that model line will be visible everywhere. It will have the 3D geometry, and once you create it in the site plan, you will have it in the ground floor plan, L1, etc. The only bad thing about this is you will have to turn off these lines in your sections and elevation. With detail line, you will basically create it here and it will be visible here, but it will not be visible anywhere else. You will have to basically group it. And if you want to use it, for example, in the ground floor, you will have to group it and then copy that group, and then it will be visible in ground floor as well. But the good thing is you will not have to hide it in the elevations and sections. The reason I'm going to be using detail line in this case is also the fact that my terrain is very steep and I'm going to actually create the graphics later on where is this kind of layering thing going on. As you can see, these lower parts of the terrain are kind of grayish and the upper parts are black, so I do want to have my lines always visible in full color and full thickness. I don't want these setback lines to be affected by that, so I'm going to be using detail lines. But as I said, if you have the flat terrain, you can also use the model lines. So now we go to Annotation tool and we go to the detail line option. And as you can see, I have already previously created these lines that I will be using, but let's do that again together. We go to the Manage options and we go to the Line Style option. I will click this plus sign and I will create the new subcategory. Let's just call it Setback Line. And here I will assign it some thickness, let's say for example 5, and I will also add it the color. Basically in this site plan, let's just create setback to be blue and property line to be red. So I will click on the blue color, 5 thickness, and I will also use dash dot line and click OK. My plot line is red because I have previously set it up in the object styles to be red. I will just find the site option and I will click the plus sign, and here you have the property line option. Here I have just set it up to be 5 thickness and I have set it up to be red color. Of course, if you want to learn all about these graphical settings in depth, I will post the link in the description below of that lesson. Be very mindful that everything you set up in the object styles is actually going to apply to all of your plans. So once we have done this, I click OK, and now we can draw our detail lines. I will choose the detail line tool in Annotate option, and I will choose this setback line that we have just created. And I also choose the pick line option. Here in the offset, I define 2.5 meters. This will simply offset all of these lines by 2.5. And as you can see, this line that I keep creating is actually going to be blue. Of course, when I turn on the thin lines, we can also see that it has the bigger thickness than most of these lines. And the next thing we do about setting up our graphics is actually give this drawing a little bit of depth. I go to the visibility graphics or template, and I will find the lines option. And I will click this plus sign, and what I search here is the beyond lines. Beyond lines give us the depth of these lines. We can click here and we can just choose the weight of 1, and we can also choose some grayish color. Basically, this will make all of the lines that are kind of far away to be gray. So that actually gives this drawing a little bit of layerness. So I click OK, and as you can see, everything that is on my ground floor is black and everything that is beyond is gray. Basically, this setting depends on your view range. When I go to my view range, I can see that the bottom is ground floor and everything up until this setting will be black, but everything that is below will be gray. So it is important that if this does not work for you, if you have turned your beyond lines to gray, it is important to check the view range. But before we continue with the lesson, let's hear a word of a sponsor, which is also actually me. If you want to learn Revit with me, I have actually created a course which is designed specifically to make you ready to work in Revit independently or in big teams. In this course, you also have the assignments where you get to exercise everything that you learn, and you also get to ask questions directly from instructors. So everything that was not clear to you, everything that you need help with, I answer these questions the same day. So you don't just watch videos, but you interactively learn Revit. I have also made the special attention to the people who already have some experience but in AutoCAD, so I have made sure to actually help you transition from AutoCAD to Revit very smoothly. While this is a beginner's course, it is also very useful for people who already have some experience but want to level up their Revit knowledge. To see the course content, go to thebeamtonic.net, and I hope to see you in these lessons. So let's continue with this lesson. I also can notice that my decking lines just got weird when I changed the position, and that is most likely because these lines are detail lines. So I go to my floor plan, I go to edit type, and I go to structure. I find this material and I go to the graphics tab, and I can see that this pattern is the pattern that is actually used for walls, so I have to create the new pattern here. So I click on this one, and instead of drafting, I am going to choose model because drafting patterns don't rotate. I can either choose one of these or I can just copy this one, for example, and I'm just going to call it decking. Its thickness is 0.075 meters, and I think that will work here, and I click OK. So we choose this decking, click OK, OK once again, and now we have very thin pattern. But we see that it's actually rotated properly, it is in line with our building, so I can just go back and I can just change the thickness to be a little bit something like this, 0.1, and that seems to be a little bit better than what we had before. Let's say 0.15 and click OK, OK once again. And now this looks very good for decking. Basically, I wanted to include this in the lesson because if you have the drafting patterns, they will rotate badly when you change the orientation of your drawing. So if you want to have the good rotation of the patterns, make sure that you use the model patterns. These will actually always keep the proper rotation no matter which rotation you choose here in the orientation part. Now that we have all that covered, we can also add the text of our drawing. I use the text tool and I will just create the new text type. Here we have 1.5 Arial and I can copy that one, copy any generic text family and just use the duplicate tool, and I will use, for example, 2.4 millimeters Arial narrow text. And I will also call it red, so I can just type the plot line text. So I will use the text of 2.4 Arial narrow and I will just change the color to be red and click OK. Now I just draft the plot line text. Make sure it is as aligned with my plot line as possible. It would be awesome if Align tool worked with the text, but that still does not happen. So we have to align it manually still. And I will just copy this text to the rest of the sides and I will fast forward this because I'm just rotating the text again and I don't want to bore you with that stuff. Now I do the same for the blue text and I will just call it the setback line, and I will choose this text type that I created and I will go to edit type option and duplicate it and simply instead of red call it blue. I will pick the blue color and simply call it setback line instead of plot line. And just like before, I will simply copy it and rotate it so each of these sides have the setback line. So we are halfway there. Next we have these generic annotation entrances and I'm going to create a new family. I'm going to go to File, New Family. I'm just going to navigate to the metric family templates and I'm going to use the annotation families. I find the metric generic annotations. I create the field region and I simply draft the triangle. Honestly, I have no idea how big this triangle is going to be, so I will just draft some generic size and I will also create the label and I will click below the triangle. I get this label option and I will create the new parameter and I will call it the text. I will also choose instance here so I can apply the different names to the same family type. I will just here instead of length also choose text so I can insert the actual text. If I leave it as number, I will only be able to insert number. So I use this add parameters to label option and I click OK. And as we can see, we have 3 millimeters text and we can also change that to be 2.5 millimeters, just like our setback and plot line text. I will call it 2.5. I will choose the Arial narrow and click OK. Now I can see that obviously my field region is giant, so I click on it. I go to the Edit Sketch option. I select all of these lines and I choose the Scale tool. I will scale it, for example, by half. So I will choose the numerical settings and I will choose 0.5 here. This also seems a little bit big, so I choose the scale again and I will choose 0.7, for example. And now this seems a little bit better. Let's just import it into project and see. First, before I insert it, I will select this text and I will go to edit type, and instead of opaque, I will choose the transparent option and click OK. And now I have this triangle and I can see that this one is giant as well. Let's just first write the name to see how it works with the text, and I will just call this main entrance. What I can notice is that also the text is a little big and the triangle is definitely a little big. So for text, I will choose 2. Oh, I actually didn't change the 3 millimeters. So I will try 2.5 like I planned in the beginning. I click OK. And for the triangle, I go to the scale again, and this time I will scale it 0.5 times again. So I get half the size. I load into project and I click OK, and this is the old site plan, but this is what we get basically. What is also important is that before inserting you have to save as your family so you can give it some proper naming. I will just save it to my families and I will call it entrance arrow. I click save and I load into the project. So I actually get the good name of the family. I will just select this one, and instead of family 1, I will find entrance arrow family. It is important to actually save it before inserting into the project, because if you don't, you will have to manually remove it from your families. So once I have inserted it, I now insert the name again and I will call it main entrance. If you want this arrow and this text to have different color, like in that site plan, you can go to this family and you can click on this field region and go to edit type. You can rename it to, for example, dark red. And here, instead of black, choose some darker red color. We do the same for text as well, and I go to the edit type and I will simply, instead of black, choose dark red. I click OK and let's insert it here, and now it looks a lot better. I will also copy here and I will call this the car entrance. Just rotate it as well and let's call it car entrance. I can also go to the visibility graphics again and I can find planting category, and I can change the projection lines to be a little bit greener. Let's say something like this. So these trees are not as black. Let's say something like this. So basically we are very close to the end. This is a rather big lesson, but it is actually something that has a lot of steps in it, and it is important to actually be able to master all of these steps. The next important thing is spot elevations. For these site plans it is important to add both survey and project elevation. So I go to annotate option and I go to spot elevation. And here I will choose the target project default elevation. The most important thing is when you are placing this spot elevation, you go to edit type and you make sure that elevation base is project base point. We will add these elevations a couple of times somewhere in the important spots in the project. I will not add as many elevations as in that site plan because it is important I just show you how to do it. And let's just add maybe this much. And now I have this project base spot elevations, and these are actually relative to the project, but we also need the survey point elevation. So I also use the spot elevation tool, and I'm going to duplicate this existing elevation. I'm going to call it absolute no symbol. And here in the elevation base, instead of project base, I will choose the survey point, so it actually counts my actual survey elevations. Also, it is important to note that this will not work unless you have set up the heights of your project. That is also part of the lesson of how to set up the coordinates of your project, which is linked in the description below. So once you choose survey point here, it is also important to choose the symbol none. Basically, we have already added the symbol with these project base ones, and now we just want the text. So I click OK, and I will simply add the absolute elevations below each of these project base elevations. I will just add this here, and I will move this to be able to include all of this. It is important to catch the same reference because you must be cautious not to accidentally spot elevation something different so you don't have the coordinated elevations. And you do this for all the main parts of the project. Of course, it is important to check your area regulations to see what falls under the important spots. Usually it is some kind of entrance, ground floor, some of these elevation changes. Obviously, for project like this, I have to have the spot elevation everywhere here. Each of these different layers have to have elevations, each of these different paths, these walkways, but of course we don't have time for that because this lesson is already too long as it is. And now we are near the end, but the most complicated thing I have left for the end. Of course, if this is not necessary for your project, you can skip this part, but right now we are going to actually create these points, these plot points that are important for the building and the schedule for these points. So now I will create the new generic model family. I will choose the new family. I will navigate to the metric families. I will find the generic model family and I will click open, and I will just draft some circle here using the symbolic lines. I will draft a circle. I will just give it some random dimensions for now, and later on I can just change it. I will draft some lines and I will use the rotate tool here and I will select copy. And I will just rotate 90 degrees. Now by default, this generic model is going to have the mark, and we are going to use that mark later. But we also have to provide some parameter that will create the X and Y parameters for it. So before loading it, I'm first going to save as, so it can have the proper name. I will just choose the generic model option and I will call it the site point family or something like that, something that makes sense. And I will also go to the manage object style option and I will just create some new line. For example, let's give it some orange line, just so it has the different color. I will just give it this color and click OK. OK once again. And I will just choose that orange line option here in the projection. And now I can load this into my family. I add it here in this exact spot, and I'm just going to scale it up a little bit. I'm just selecting all of these lines and I'm using the scale tool, and I'm going to scale it, for example, 4 times, just so it's a little bit bigger. It might be a little bit too big now. So I'm going to give this mark DP1, for example, and I'm going to copy it everywhere. I mean all of these edges of my building. Here in my area, we basically have to have one generic model everywhere that is actually some edge of the building. So I just have to make sure that it's visible because here I have placed it to be below my floor. So I will just select it and make sure that it is above this height, the height of this floor. So I select it and added the elevation from the level that is above or in the floor elevation. So now I also added the marks. This one will be P2, this one will be P3, this one will be P4 and P5. And now we need to insert the XY parameters to these points. So we will do that by adding them the shared parameters. I go to the shared parameter option. First I will create a new group and I will call it the site coordinates. And here I will create the parameter that is called X coordinates. I also make sure that it's number, so we can easily just fill out the numeric value. And I click OK. Now I will add one more parameter and I will call it the y coordinates. And I will also give it the number and I click OK. And now I have to go to the project parameters and I will create the new parameter. I will choose the shared parameters here and I will choose my site coordinates, and first I will add the x value and I will add it to generic models. I click OK, and if you're interested in the in-depth lesson of shared parameters, I will also link that in the description below. But yeah, this lesson really needs a lot of other lessons, but it's okay because this is not actually the lesson for the beginners. If you are creating site plan in the Revit project, you actually need to know a lot of these other stuff. So I click OK. And I will also create one for the U parameter. I choose the site coordinates and I choose the U option, and I will also assign it to the generic models. I click OK. OK once again, and now when we select this point, we actually have X and Y coordinates. This is basically a long process because Revit still cannot actually do this in some faster way, but it is what it is. There are plugins and the Dynamo scripts that actually do this faster, but I do like to actually explain these processes to you in the most beginner's terms, because once you actually understand how it works step by step, it will be a lot easier to you to understand those more advanced stuff. So once I created this, what I can do is I can go to Annotate and I can go to Spot Coordinate tool. I can then just click on this coordinate and I can simply retype it. So for this one, we simply in the X import this value. And for the epsilon, we have this other value and we insert it. And we do this for pretty much each of these spots. This is a little bit lengthy process, but for now it is the one that actually doesn't require you to know any Dynamo and you don't have to buy any plugins. It is very beginner friendly, while it is very slow, unfortunately. And that is it. I have added all of these spots. They all now have the values. And now I can go to the schedules and I can create the new schedule. I use the generic models and I will just call it site points schedule. I click OK, and here I will just choose mark and I will choose the X coordinates and Y coordinates and I click OK. And now I have all of these other generic models that I don't need, so in the filter I can just filter by the mark and I can say mark contains P. That way I just get rid of all of these that I don't need. And now you have the schedule of your site coordinates. And now I've dragged this view and this schedule to my sheet, and all that's left to do is actually tag these points, because as you can see we have mark in the schedule, but we have no indication of what this point is in the drawing. So to create a tag for them, we first go to File, New, Family. I navigate back to the metric templates, I go to the annotation folder and I choose metric generic tag. I can delete this text and I go to create option, I go to label and I add a new label. Since we have marked our points in the mark option, I will choose mark here and I will drag it to the right side. I click OK and now I just update the font by going to edit type, and here I can choose, for example, Arial Narrow because everything else is Arial Narrow. I will also change the color and here I will choose the same pink that I have chosen for my points, and I actually changed them to pink because with the orange color they were a little bit invisible on the white background. So I'm going to choose pink here. I also changed the background to be transparent so I don't have that white fill, and I click OK. I will save as this family. And I will choose the folder where I want to save it and I will call it, for example, generic model text tag pink, for example. I then load it into project. Now I can go to the tag by category option and I can just tag these points. I can tag one and I don't need leader in this case, so I'm just going to uncheck the leader line option and I uncheck it now for all the others. So I do this, 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 and this, and now I can just move this text a little bit away from my points. And that is it. And I know this tutorial is actually very long and that can be a little bit discouraging because I do my best to actually create lessons that are a little bit shorter, but basically creating site plan in Revit does require you to have some kind of Revit experience. As you can see, you have to know many things. First one being the georeferencing and actually understanding these plot lines, plot parameters, plot points, etc. So it is definitely not a beginner's lesson, but don't be discouraged by this. It is actually this long only once you do it for the first time, but once you get used to this, it is going to be a lot easier than it seems. You're going to get used to this process, so it is not going to take you that much time. This is actually going to take you like 1 hour at best, so don't worry about this. It just looks a little bit more advanced than it actually is, but this is actually how you create the site plan. Of course, there are many other things like creating legends, dimensions, etc., but all of that is actually part of another lesson. So if you have any questions and if there is any part of the process you did not understand, comment below and I will do my best to answer all of your questions. And thank you for watching. If you like my videos, like and subscribe, it means a lot to me. And thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson. Bye! If you want to learn Revit like a pro, take a look at my architectural course through the link below. You will learn how to develop the project from concept to final design using Autodesk Revit. It is ideal for beginners but valuable for anyone looking to build a solid foundation. By the end, you'll know how to take a design from concept to detailed documentation with confidence and clarity. You will gain a solid Revit workflow you can actually use independently or in work in larger teams in architectural studios. With almost 100 structured video lessons, it is designed to help beginners master Revit step by step. To support your progress, I've included assignments with each lesson, plus the opportunity to ask questions and receive guidance directly from me whenever you need it. This way, you're not just watching tutorials, you're actively learning, practicing, and improving every step of the way. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.